Where will Fortinet stock be in 1 year? Well, to help answer that question, I want to look at some observations that the company's CFO made in its latest quarterly earnings call. So let's jump right into that. So the CFO saying, we believe macro uncertainty impacted their billings performance through average contract duration, and in the second half, an elevated level of enterprise deals pushing to future quarters. In other words, businesses that Fortinet was dealing with trying to sell its service were cautious. And instead of signing maybe a 2-year contract, they signed a 1-year contract instead. And that led to a reduction in the company's billings. In the second quarter, however, an unusually large volume of deals that were expected to close in June instead pushed out to future periods. And this is something that's been happening not just industry-wide, but economy-wide. Whenever companies see an opportunity to pause or delay spending, in 2023, they've been exercising that option. Why, you might say? Well, they're afraid that there's a recession coming. The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates by over 500 basis points, and businesses are afraid that's going to cause a significant decrease in consumer spending that's been slow to come to fruition, but businesses are still fearful, and so that's hurting Fortinet to be sure. However, the company says that they see new regulatory requirements will continue to provide market tailwinds. More and more so, regulatory agencies are mandating companies employ cybersecurity services. No longer are regulatory agencies leaving it up to the discretion of businesses to secure their information. And so this is providing a tailwind to the industry. So the longer term drivers remain very solid for the company. Right? Cybersecurity, like I mentioned, is becoming more of a necessity rather than a nice to have. And that means more growth prospects for the cybersecurity industry. And Fortinet, as one of the larger players in the industry, will stand to benefit from that trend. And so for the third quarter, the company expects billings in the range of 1.56 billion to 1.62 billion, which at the midpoint would represent growth of just 13%. And revenue in the range of 1.3 to 1.375 billion, which at the midpoint would represent growth of 17%. Now, if I was to show you the company's growth in recent quarters, that 17% growth rate you see would be lower than the 25.5% growth rate in the most recent update. And you could see a downward trending revenue growth forecast, a revenue growth trend for Fortinet over the last several quarters. Going back to the CFO's comments, for the full year, the CFO saying they see revenue in the range of 6.49 billion to 6.59 billion, which would represent growth of 17% for the full year as well as for the third quarter. So certainly the company has experienced growth deceleration here in 2023 for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Businesses are turning more cautious. So while it's a little early to providing guidance for the next year, management is saying that we expect our near-term performance to represent a short-term trough, meaning that they expect this revenue growth deceleration to come down here and at this point to hit an inflection point and turn upward again. And so that trend I showed you earlier with revenue growth decelerating, the CFO is saying that they expect that to be the bottom. They expect that growth rate to reverse and move higher, which will be great news for Fortinet stock investors to be sure. So where will Fortinet stock be in 1 year? Well, if what the CFO is saying is true and revenue growth returns to acceleration, then the stock price 1 year from now is likely to be higher than where it is today, That is, if what management is saying is true, because a lot of the risk right now with Fortinet stock is that this trend for revenue growth deceleration just continues, and revenue growth gets lower and lower and lower, and raising the risks for investors that the long-term growth prospects are not as good as expected. So if that trend reverses and moves upward, that's going to be positive news for the stock price, and in 1 year it could be higher than it is today.
I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.